Hey, I'm Chase, and this is All Things Random. Today, we're doing a build video. Today, we're building a gun cabinet concealed by a steel flag. Now, I say concealed by a steel flag. It could be concealed a little bit better. There are going to be some modifications I do to this box later in the future. Before that, hit the subscribe button. I got a lot of new videos coming out this week. But let's hop into the build video from start to finish. Now let's start with the flag itself. Now it was cut by a friend of mine on a homemade plasma cutting table. I gave him the design and he completed a raw cut. Now he gave it an old, tattered, worn look, which I think looks pretty awesome. Now, once I got the flag, I began to mark out the lines for painting. The pattern I chose was a thin blue line flag. The pattern of this flag changes the colors of red and blue to black, and the white stripes I'll just leave bare metal. The measuring process was not that difficult, and I would say this part was basically the easiest part of the entire thing. Now, once the entire flag was taped off, I laid down a few coats of satin black. Now, this was quick drying paint, so I was able to complete the flag in one night. Once the black paint completely dried, I removed the tape so that I could make sure that there was no leftover residue on the steel itself. I didn't want any bleed over. And once I made sure the entire thing was completely dried, I began to tape off the steel line or the white line just beneath the star pattern. This was going to be painted blue. Now, while choosing the paint, for me, the finish didn't matter because I was going to epoxy it. So you could either choose a gloss finish or a satin finish, but in the end, after an epoxy, it's all going to be shiny either way. Now, the blue paint I chose was the cheapest Rust-Oleum I could find. And it just shows you that sometimes it doesn't matter the cost of the paint because this turned out very well. Now here is the flag with the paint dry. Now you could just spray a clear coat of paint over it, or you could use this two-part epoxy, which is used for bar tops. It gives that nice high glass finish. Now you just mix two parts equally, part A, part B. You mix it for 12 minutes. That's extremely important. If it's not mixed properly, it will not harden properly. Now once mixed, you need to spread it evenly over the flag. I made sure to cover the entire flag, taking care to get the edges. Make sure the flag is level also because the epoxy is self-leveling and will run off one side if it's lower than the other. Now, once all the epoxy is applied, you need to use a heat gun to run over the surface. Now, by using a heat gun, it's gonna get all the air bubbles out of the epoxy itself. If you don't, it's gonna dry very cloudy and it's not gonna have that glass look. This is also a good chance to get any spots that you missed
Because of the glass finish, you should be able to see small spots. I actually fixed a couple here and there, and make sure it's in a dust-free environment because this thing will collect dust. Now, next I went to the hardware store, and what I did was I found the pre-cut wood section. Now, I don't have the best tools, but this allows you to do the least amount of work as possible. Then I chose a very thin piece of plywood for the front and the back. And my goal for this was to create the least amount of bulk as possible. Next, I measured out the size of the box that I wanted, keeping in mind that I still want to conceal it as much as possible. I cut the lengths, and then finally I glued all the corners together. I then used a corner vise to hold the glue until it dried. Then I completed all 4 corners in the same fashion. Once it was dried, I went to a friend's to complete the box. I needed to cut it down the center, creating the lid. Next, the rear was routed out so the backing could be inserted after I finished the inside, after I felted it. And then I glued the plywood to the front and then stapled it in place. I then needed to decide how I was going to mount the gun inside the box. I also decided later to add shelves inside, so I had to measure everything out to be mounted later after it was felted. Now here's one of the things I thought was cool. Now I ordered on Amazon this RFID electronic lock. Now it came with cards and key chips and everything else, and I feel like it just gave it sort of a coolness factor. Now, the most difficult thing I feel was mounting the lock, and we'll discuss a little more of that later. But here is me assembling the box. Now the goal is to find a place, pre-assemble all this, pre-assemble the lock, get the hinge on, make sure everything is where it should be before you disassemble it and stain it. Just a quick note, the hinge I use is referred to as a piano hinge. Now, I placed it on the outside and not the inside because I wanted to have the most amount of structure as possible to attach. The flag is relatively heavy, and I understand this is a concealment box, and well, maybe you'll see the hinge and know what it is, but I didn't want it to sag over time because of the weight of the flag. This thing is extremely solid, however. Once I completed the disassembly, I needed to prep the box for staining. Sometimes you can sand it. I didn't, however. What I did was I just used a red mahogany simple wood stain and I rubbed it in with a lint-free cloth. This I found was the easiest way, and it actually spread very evenly over the wood itself. It gave it a nice rich color. Now it takes about 8 hours for this stuff to dry, a total of 24 hours, however 8 hours between coats if you want to add an additional coat. I did not add an additional coat. Now during the time of drying, I went inside the house and I used black felt to create a nice interior backing of the box. Now this is a very simple part. Now the only thing I did was pre-cut the fabric to about the same shape, slightly overhang, and I used just some Elmer's spray fabric glue that I picked up from Joann Fabrics, sprayed the back of the fabric, then sprayed the wood itself, giving it a few minutes to kind of tack up, and then use my hands to spread it out evenly. Now it went on great. I've used this stuff in the past and it holds for a very long period of time. Now, this also is the time that I added the shelves in, and I added the bolts that was going to hold the gun in place. Now, I chose not to use the washers like I had in the pre-assembly process because I found that it was more difficult to remove the gun. Now, after everything was said and done, it was time to attach the flag to the front of the box. Now, I used this clear epoxy glue. Now, it had only a 5-minute working time, which throughout this process became extremely frustrating. Now, as I was mixing up the first batch, I did not have enough epoxy and I felt like I was working against the clock. Now, what I ended up doing was creating small little mixtures of epoxy throughout the rear of the flag. And when I felt like I had enough, I then spread it around the rear and I placed the lid of the box up against the rear of the flag, and I used a 5-gallon bucket to weight it down so there was enough pressure while it was drying. And I gave it a solid 24 hours to dry. Once it was all dry, last but not least was reassembling the box, reattaching the hinge and the lock. Now, the lock was a problem as the RFID would not read through the flag and the wood. Now, to combat this, I raised the battery and the sensor off the back and had to cut a slot for the card to be inserted from the top. Now, this itself caused an issue because cards are only so long and you basically have to stick almost the entire card in. Here is sort of where I may change it up in the future. Now, finally was placing the backing on and screwing it into place. And this is the final step. Now, I just used standard screws and I didn't really stay in the back because it's going to be hidden by the wall, but I didn't really epoxy or glue it into place because I want to be able to remove it in the future, or this gift that I'm actually building for my dad, I want him to be able to remove it in the future if he wants. Now, here is the final product. I was happy that it didn't seem to stick that far out from the wall. That was my concern, but I may rework the lock in the future. Now, all in all, I think this is a great build, and it was only $40 to complete, and it took about maybe 2.5 to 3 days total when it comes to the drying time of the epoxy. What I ended up doing was sticking a small piece of tape on the card, and then you slide it in, pops open just like this, a gun mounted on the inside with a couple shells if you want to put either a magazine or some valuables.
Now, if you like videos like this, hit that subscribe button again down below. If you've come this far, then you like build videos. Guess what? I got a lot more build videos coming up in the future. In fact, I'll be doing a lava shelving system, and I'll also be doing a lava epoxy electric guitar that I'll be building from a kit that I'll be modifying. So if you like build videos, remember to hit that notification bell. I got a lot more diving things coming out also in the future. Again, more watch videos as well. Until next time.